Amazing. Well, welcome to day two of Stronger 2024. We're incredibly excited to welcome Rinki and Casey today to our breakout session, Leading Together, Collaborative Success in Cybersecurity Leadership. Welcome, Rinki and Casey.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
So to kick things off, Rinki, we'll start with you, just a quick bio from both of you, and then we'll dive into some questions here.
Sounds great. I am the VP and CISO at Bill. I lead the security and IT organizations. I've been at Bill for almost 3 years. Prior to this, I have 20 years of cybersecurity experience, worked at PG&E, Walmart, eBay, Intuit, Palo Alto Networks, IBM, took my first CISO job at Rubrik, then at Twitter, and now at Bill. I sit on the board of Vaulttree and was on the board of ForgeRock prior to that. And super excited to have this conversation, Ethan, with you and Casey.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. Casey Essery. I'm located in Atlanta, Georgia, and I've been with Bill for 2.5 years. I'm our VP and Deputy CISO. Prior to Bill, I've spent a lot of time in healthcare. I spent about 15 years in healthcare doing security, worked at E-Trade and Twitter. Again, also very excited to be here today. I lead our security team and excited to have the conversation about what it means to kind of be in these leadership roles.
So fantastic. We're so glad both of you are here. So Rinki, could you start by giving us an overview of what led to the creation of the Deputy CISO role at Bill and why you felt it was necessary? What changes in the security landscape or organizational needs prompted this decision?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I joined Bill, I actually joined as the CISO, and I had the role of security, and that lasted for all about 2 weeks before I was told that I would get the gift of IT. And so about 2 weeks into the job, we lost a leader in the company, and they were struggling figuring out where IT should land, and said, "Rinki, will you take it?" I was voluntold. And IT at that point was help desk, our infrastructure, our conference rooms, and all of our digital employee services. And then later that grew to also include business technology, our business applications like Salesforce, NetSuite, so forth. And as that happened, I realized that those areas really needed a transformation, whereas in security, we were really scaling the organization. And in those areas, we really needed to transform. And I felt like I needed to have a leader that's going to own security end to end. And so that is when we created the role of Deputy CISO.
So Casey, as someone who's transitioned into the role of Deputy CISO, what has your journey been like? What responsibilities do you focus on, and how do they complement Rinki's as CISO?
Yeah, so prior to being a deputy CISO here at Bill, I had the benefit of working in a lot of different areas of security. So when I say I spent 15 years at United Health Group in healthcare, I got the benefit of working across all of the silos of security, or all the functions of security. I wasn't one of those people that wanted to necessarily deep dive into any one particular part of security. My journey was that I got to try a lot of different things and try to build a lot of different things within that journey. But I really like trying to sew all of those things together. I really like trying to kind of bring all of the elements of security together, and bring those together for a company. And so during that time, I actually got a chance to be a chief of staff to one of our lead risk leaders. And that really kind of opened my eyes to figuring out how we can take a lot of these different elements of the work that we do and present those back in a way that can be kind of understood and absorbed by the business. And that kind of put me on this journey of deciding kind of how I wanted to kind of spend the rest of my career. So that led me to Twitter, working with Rinki, and then that led me here to Bill, to be able to build on top of those skill sets that I need in order to become a CISO.
So it's the history that you two share that I think we're gonna tie back in a little bit later in this conversation, especially when it comes to kind of the dynamic and the trust that you two have built. So with Rinki, with Casey as Deputy CISO in place, you kind of spoke about the dynamic scope of your role as CISO. How has your role as CISO shifted since you've added Casey as Deputy CISO? Are there areas you've been able to focus on more deeply as a result?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is with Casey, when Casey first joined Bill, a lot of the operational engineering areas were under Casey. And then as she's taken on the entire security vertical, I've been able to focus a lot more being strategic, kind of like at the business level, not just for security, but just understanding where the business is shifting, understanding how we can make sure that even the IT side is enabling the business and allows us to get in front of a lot of the initiatives that companies driving. So I feel like it can be much more strategic and provide value in different ways. And yet I know that Casey's got security taken care of. And so I don't need to kind of be in the day to day, and I can bring kind of relevant information that may help run the programs more better and kind of more proactively.
So with that, how, especially, and we'll tie, I want to circle back to kind of the business value component that that you just touched on. So both of you work closely together as leaders. So, and circling back to kind of your history, your relationship, how has your relationship evolved? Casey, you alluded to kind of working together over the course of multiple chapters in your respective careers. How has your relationship evolved, and what makes it successful in such a critical partnership? Casey, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with the last part first and kind of what makes it successful. I think from literally the first 5 minutes we started talking to each other, there's been a very transparent and open conversation about what our vision for this is, and how this works. We talk all the time. There's a constant stream of communication that goes on between us. And I don't want anyone to believe that that means like we're all always in sync. I think that the constant communication makes us have these conversations and realize that we might be approaching something in two different ways, or we might be thinking about things in two different ways. And I think that that's the benefit of this partnership, is that we can both bring our own experiences and our own skill sets to the table, and we can have very, very open and transparent dialogue in security, which is extremely important. And I think that that's what makes it a success. Over time, you build that trust, you build that relationship. When we first started out, of course, I was doing a lot of program management and a lot of chief of staff work for Rinki. I learned her style. I learned how to understand how we transition and deliver our work to the business in a certain way, and the importance of that. And I just think over time that those responsibilities have grown, those opportunities have grown that Rinki's given me in this role. And I think through that, again, you build that trust more and more over time, to where now we we are in sync with each other. But that took a lot of communication through lots of different challenges that we've been through at the various times that we worked together to kind of build that to where we are today.
Totally. Rinki, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I met Casey. Casey, was it 2020? I think 2020, right? Yeah, so it hasn't even been that long, and she was like recruited off the street, I like to say, at Twitter, and so it wasn't even through my network. And so when we met, she came in as my chief of staff, and as we kind of grew and went through our security program, she started owning more pieces of security, and I was like, okay, like she can take things on. She's got expertise in certain areas of cyber. And quickly she can take something on, navigate an organization, take really complex problems and like boil them down to become more simpler so we can actually solve them. And when I left Twitter and came to Bill, I was like, Casey, are you interested in taking on more of a security oriented role? And maybe like, have you considered going down the security path in CISO? And she's like, it's crossed my mind. And I was like, would you want to come do that? And so this is kind of where we landed. There's a high level of trust and integrity that goes into this kind of role, because we're kind of, like Casey's in board meetings with me. We're doing everything together. In fact, she kind of like, I started off taking all the board meetings. Then it was like, Casey, you've got to come with me. Now you're going to do the board meetings. And so there's a huge level of trust. But also like, you're basically building out your succession plan. And, I get questions on like, why do we need Rinki here? Casey's just can take over. And that's exactly what I wanted to build. And that's what we have now.
So we're gonna spend some time on a lot of what you just said, Ricky.
Yeah.
But something that you absolutely could have fooled me that you all met just 4 years ago. So I wanna double click on this for a second and ask what are some of the key qualities or practices that have helped you both build such a successful working relationship? Rinky, we'll start with you and then we'll go back to Casey.
Yeah, I feel like for me, what's the most important is that you have trust at that level, that you can all be authentic. We can have really difficult conversations, different points of view. Like Casey and I come at problems in very different ways and sometimes land in at different places. And you have to be able to navigate that in a very trusted way, know that you walk out, agree or disagree, and we're going to give each other feedback, and that you're walking out like still as really close colleagues and friends. And so to me, that's the most important thing. And to be able to do that takes a lot of maturity, takes a lot of integrity, and you have to go through difficult shit together. And so we've gone through some really tough times together, in leading programs, in, navigating organizations, both at Twitter, and now at Bill, and you build that relationship over time. I could tell you, like, going back in my career, when I started my CISO career, I wouldn't even have thought of bringing in a deputy CISO. And so like now we're at a point where my role has grown to own security plus plus. And we're at a point where like I trust Casey also with the program, right? So it's like she owns security end to end, and it's her baby now. And so like you have to both be in a place to allow that to actually happen.
Right. Absolutely. And we're going to circle back to, again, putting a lot of pins in what you keep saying here, Rinki. But Casey, your thoughts on kind of what are kind of the key components that have helped you and Rinki build such a strong relationship?
Yeah, I know we've talked about it, but it's that open dialogue. Like Rinki said, we certainly come at things differently, but it's willing to listen to each other. It's willing to kind of see each other's viewpoints and talk through those things. I also think it's truthfully opportunities to succeed or fail. And I mean that in the best way possible. I think that sometimes in order to grow in these kinds of roles, and you have to be transparent with everyone around you and say, this is the role that we're building and this is why, and that we're building the succession plan. But it's not just giving that person more responsibility. It's not just adding to the responsibility of that person, but it's also giving that person those opportunities where, sure, Rinki could have gone into a meeting and presented something, or she could have gone to the board meetings and presented that herself, and I could have stayed behind the scenes. That's not what she did. She made sure that I had those opportunities to, take on those things and then give feedback on how I could have done them differently. And I don't think we could have gotten here to where we are if she wouldn't have been willing to not only grow my responsibility in security, but also grow my skill sets within that and let me do that.
So this dovetails really leads us into a very good kind of transition period here. So with a lot of security leaders and practitioners in the audience, what organizational signals indicate that it's the right time to consider adding or starting to build out kind of this deputy CISO / succession plan? Rinki, we'll start with you. And you had kind of mentioned again, expanding scope of your role, and it kind of just fit, but what indicators should folks in the audience look for?
Yeah, and I'll try my best to be as specific but as I can, but it's going to be a little bit fluffy. So hopefully there's no actual playbook on this. For me, it was when I was building out a program in one of my past companies. I was employee number one, but I was the CISO. That would not be the right time to bring in a deputy. I was still building out the program, figuring out the strategy, figuring out what we needed. I think that team got to about like maybe 20, 25 people. And I still don't think it was quite there where where we would need a deputy. And, it was just kind of growing teams. I had 4 or 5 critical leaders under me. But security still kind of was manageable. And it felt like if I was to leave, one of those leaders might be able to take over as a succession for the size of the company that we were at and the scale of security and where it was at. I think where it starts changing is when you have a very large team, you may need a deputy, you may need someone. And I want to define deputy in a second too. So I'll get there. But I think when you have a really large team, it's kind of hard to get a handle on things. And so either you've got to have really strong leaders that are domain experts that each have kind of are able to either all of them can step up and be a CISO or one of them can, or it might be time that, hey, I need a deputy. I think the CISO's role is also changing and morphing. And so CISOs are taking on more. I hear data governance, I hear trust, I hear fraud, sometimes physical security, IT, platform engineering, biz tech. So like as CISOs roles grow, you can't just be everywhere. You can't have the entire security vertical and then plus all these extra roles. And it might be time to bring in a deputy or someone that owns the security vertical completely. So I think there's all these different things. Now, deputy CISO means different things to different leaders. For me, it's been somebody who is basically like next in line to be the CISO that can take over the entire security function, that owns security strategy, that's succession plan. And I think most companies that are large companies would want someone in that role, that you don't want to be caught with your pants down when your CISO leaves or something, or someone's, something happens, and you want to have a really strong succession plan. In
Mm.
other with other CISOs and a lot of friends of mine, they have CISOs that are playing more deputy CISO that's playing more of a chief of staff role, maybe chief of staff or business operations plus
Mm.
maybe one specific vertical in security. So I think people define it very differently. For me, it's what I said. It's like, and I think a deputy CISO is succession and end to end owns the security vertical.
So we'll shift gears here a little bit for kind of this aspect of this question for you, Casey. In your role, what skills or qualities do you believe are most critical for a deputy CISO? As Rinki said, it means different things to different people. But as someone who is sitting in that seat, what skills and qualities matter the most?
Yeah, security is always growing. It would be impossible for a CISO, a deputy CISO, anyone in security to truly be an expert across all domains. It's physically impossible. So there's never an assumption that I should have to be like the only technical resource in the room or the most skilled technical resource in the room. It's more about how we, divide out those responsibilities and know that we've got all of our functionalities covered, and making sure that I build a team that we know what those risks and those skill gaps are and we can fill them. It's growing a team of leaders. So like I need to be able to not only develop my own role and be a succession plan, but I need to be able to develop that next layer of leaders underneath me as well, that can own those functions. I think it's coming to the table curious, letting your team tell you what is important and what is critical, and being able to assess that. But I think some of the biggest things that we can do for the department and for the organization is to be able to take everything that security is doing, which, to be honest, in a lot of companies, people aren't really sure what we do. They know we protect the company, but how do we do that, and what we do that, how I can help facilitate and translate that to the rest of the company, but also understand what the business needs are. So it's almost becoming that liaison between that technical team that you have and that vast set of skill sets that you have, and being able to communicate with the CTO, the peers, e-staff, the board, being able to translate what's important to us outward to the rest of the organization, and then also listen to them and tell them how we can, and have them tell us how we can serve them better. So it's the relationship building and the communications as much as it's anything.
That's definitely an interesting point that you bring up. So to kind of build on that, like how important, how would, from balancing kind of the leadership and communication skills that you're talking about versus kind of the technical expertise, it's really it sounds like, based on what you said, that it's kind of a more about sitting in between the two than it is necessarily. You obviously need kind of that base layer for both, but it is
You do.
being able to balance and act as the translator within the organization.
Yes, I think it can be a huge benefit, because again, not everybody speaks security language, and not everybody speaks, necessarily business language. Being able to understand what the priorities of your company are, but be able to figure out how security can enable those. In security, we get a lot of, wrath for saying no, and being the stop gap to a lot of things. We've tried to figure out how to enable engineering to move faster, or how to create certain product features that are in line with security and are beneficial, but also beneficial to the customer. So it's figuring out how to bridge those things together, and be that liaison to other leaders, or unblock certain, major initiatives that are going across multiple teams, and explaining the value of those things. So I think that's as critical as anything.
So to look at that balance, and then kind of look at, Rinki, your role that's kind of more on the strategic end as well, but also kind of also being that kind of that interpreter between the technical and the business. How going back to kind of the division of roles here, do you find that, Casey, you're more interacting with kind of that VP director level, and kind of it's more so just depends on the management layer that you're interacting with, or how does that breakdown look, especially as we're talking about kind of this translator role that the CISO plays and deputy CISO?
Yeah, so I'll break this down. I don't see it as a levels thing, really. When Casey first joined the organization, I mentioned that she owned operations and engineering, and culture and a few, and then was also kind of playing a chief of staff role. Then now, just like in the last year or so, and has owned end-to-end security, and there's a progression that happens there. And I don't have to get involved in the conversations with executives all the way up the chain. And I'm even talking about board, like Casey and I have interchangeable skills there. I think one thing I'll say is the CISO has to enable the deputy to be able to have that. If I'm standing in the way, like, oh, if it's going to an exec and I'm doing all of those conversations, I don't think then you're building that strong succession. So it doesn't happen overnight, it's over time, but like either Casey or I could present the entire board deck, or either Casey or I could have the conversation with an exec member. Now, if I can't be in two places at once, like Casey's got the end-to-end on security, I can go handle if I need to handle something on one of the other functions that I own, or if there's something else going on. So that's the way I see it. I think the communication, and this is where CISOs and security leaders, I think in general, are so unique, is that you have to be able to talk the technical speak, but then you have to be able to talk and communicate across like any level, any business dynamic that might be there, and any business relationship that you have, to be able to translate what's technically being said to actually driving business results and enabling the business. And so I think that's where the roles are unique. So
Mm.
it's kind of interchangeable, I would say, right? And we a lot of times we bounce things off of each other. And there's areas that I'm passionate about more than Casey, and Casey's passionate about more. So we kind of fill that for each other. But on the day-to-day operations, like Casey owns that.
So I want to double click into something really quick, because a lot of just the nature of your dynamic specifically is rooted in this idea that it requires a lot of confidence for a CISO to do exactly what you did, Rinki, where you're kind of sitting there saying, I'm going to create a clone of myself, and I'm essentially going to work to make myself more replaceable. And especially where we're seeing CISOs kind of have their feet to the fire a little bit more around whether that's board reporting, whether that's kind of aligning with business, whether that's and aligning with business value more clearly than they have in the past. What recommendations do you have for CISOs in the audience today about shifting mindsets and kind of gaining that level of confidence to be able to say, like, no, we need more security leaders, that I don't need to be a single point of failure?
Yeah, there's a couple things. One, I mentioned like your organization has to be at a certain stage. So
Absolutely.
I feel like I don't want to come across as entitled here, because we're at a certain stage, right? And so you have to be, and it hasn't always been like that. I also haven't always been in at that point in my career that someone like a deputy would even want to come work for me, because I was still kind of building my skill sets being a CISO. I think organization size, and then like we've proven ourselves again and again now on the security front that leaders want us to take on more. And if that's the case, now like I have to have the help. And if I'm trying to own everything, I'm gonna fail. And I've tried that and I have failed. And so I think it's that has to happen. And like you have to get past like there's people that do look at us and they're like, oh, why do we need Rinky? We like Casey better anyway. Like, why do we need two? And it's like, well, it's actually good for organizations to have that succession planning. And it's my job and Casey's job to teach that to the company, that this is why this is so important to build the organization in this way. And this is what happens when you don't do that. And so we've actually got a lot of support in the way that we built the organization and the structure of that. But yes, like I love it. Like for me, I love it when I don't have to be involved in case he's pulled in and like something's handled and I find out about it afterwards when it's solved. But yes, you do have to feel good about that. And there's a lot of things that come into play. And I think a part of that is where you are at in your career and whether the organization is going to allow you to build that. Because I hear a lot of CISOs and security friends tell me like, Ricky, we don't have the budget, and I would love to have that and I can't. And so I totally get that too. Not every company and every person is at the stage to have this kind of structure.
So to speak to kind of the to your point, adding better aligning with business value, and again, kind of being able to prove security as a business value, right? How, looking at security as a core business function, how has Casey in the role as deputy CISO supported the integration of security into the overall business strategy? this is a question for both of you, but we'll start with you, Rinki. How has, and again, moving into that more strategic end of things, have you been able to kind of better have you two been able to better present security as a business driver as a result of having both of you at the organization as opposed to just one?
I believe so. And I'll let Casey, do most of the talking here, but I believe so. I think like, because we have really good strategy, like I spend a lot of time also externally understanding what the industry is doing, what innovation is happening externally. I bring that back in, one, because I'm passionate about it. I love that. But also because I think it helps the company and it helps our team be stronger. So while I'm spending time with that, Casey's like running the team and we're making sure like the company's protected. And so those two are magical together and we kind of just riff off each other and it works really well. And so like that combo works and people see it and they have that feedback, like they love it. And so, and they see that and they're like, we can't do without one or the other. So that would be like my quick response to that. But Casey, I'll let you chime in here too.
Yeah, I'll chime in with saying that, Rinki introduced me to this kind of concept of security culture mindset, right? And it's something that we've really worked on since I'm sure Rinki had it before in all of her security programs, but we've really focused on it the last several years of ingraining security into the fabric or in the culture of a company. It doesn't have to be a standalone security culture and exist externally from everything else that you're doing. We try to pull in, executives and all kinds of other members across the company into our security training videos and things. So just integrating people into the fabric of what we're trying to deliver as an organization. And I think it's just really important for people in engineering or people in product or people in sales that we are not looked at as a barrier, as a blocker to anything that the business is trying to deliver. So the more that we can get ingrained with them, not in a crisis, but also not in a crisis to where they're thinking about security before. We know it costs more money and we know it takes more time to fix a security problem late in that development cycle or late in that product development than it does if we were to be ingrained early. And I think that that's what some of that relationship building and some of that, strategic thinking has allowed us to do, is kind of move left in that chain, to use that cliche, to be able to kind of, that way, if there's a new feature set or a new something that they're thinking about early, they bring us to the table first. And that just helps streamline that entire process so that we're not blocking it at the very end. And I think that that's been some of the things that are critical to how we've been able to not only build those relationships, but help, build certain things here at Bill and before.
Still incredible things. I mean, it just even just from this conversation, it's clear that you two are an absolutely extraordinary combination and an extraordinary team. So as we wrap up here, I did think we're almost at time. So any parting thoughts from either of you as we wrap up here?
No, I think just I would say that like as you're building out your security organization, especially because we have tough day jobs, right? Like just thinking about security, like I think hiring the right people that you trust on your leadership team is like super important and it can set you up for success or failure. And sometimes you make mistakes. I sure have. And I think figuring that out quickly and actioning it and getting that right team in place is super important. And that's the bottom line. And I think as security leaders, how we grow folks into the next stage of their careers and so forth only ends up being a force multiplier for the organization.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I know that there's just not enough security practitioners in the world to do everything that security is requiring to be done right now. I think investing in career building in this way is going to be critical to the success of security long term. This is viewed not only as just my success, right, but it's a company success of risk reduction. It's a company success of that succession planning, to be able to know that you've got that next layer of leadership. That way, either that, in Rinki's case, that she can take on, bigger responsibility in the company or have that more larger strategic view. I think it's critical for businesses to think about it in that way and then figure out how they can invest in their security kind of career growth within their teams as well.
Well, incredible parting thoughts from both of you. So I appreciate the time, Rinki, Casey. This was amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you all in the audience as well for attending today's session, and pop over to see Jonathan Chan and Matt Alderman starting in 1 minute. Rinki, Casey, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ethan. Thanks for having us.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Ethan.